Hello, Maryland road trippers. We are back with another stitch tutorial. This is for Valerie's design for leg 3 of the Maryland Road Trip Mystery Shawl. I am excited to show you the two designs that I put into this because yes, again, I could not make up my mind. The first design I have is this diamond pattern with seed bead accents at the points of the diamonds, and that was inspired by knight's armor, and I just really like it. The video is not doing the beads justice. They're silver and super sparkly in real life. Then the other section is inspired by tobacco barns that pepper the landscape of southern Maryland, and there are 5 different outlines of tobacco barns embroidered on this part of leg 3, and you'll see we have some stars in the sky, and we have a wee bit of seed stitch to be kind of the hills and the landscape there. So I'm going to be showing you how to do some of these things. So let's get started. Okay, so first I want to look at the pattern a little bit. There are written instructions for all the knitting in this pattern, but there are also charts. And you can see here I have page 12 from the chart, and it shows just this little bit here shows the knight's armor, and everything in this red box is repeated 6 times, which is why it says repeat 6 times. And then the tobacco barn sections are all unique. There is unfortunately no straightforward pattern there. So you just have to count. Sorry. Or you can use the written instructions for knitting it. But I wanted to have the chart in there to show the embroidery. And one of the things that makes this a little bit easier, I cut this out and taped them together. So you can see here I've got tobacco barns A and B, C and D, E, and then the knight's armor chart. So all of these we're going to knit straight across the row. We always, on the right side rows, we start in the bottom right hand corner and work to the left. And then on wrong side rows, we start way over here at the left and work our way back across. This blue line here indicates the edge marker. That's that seed stitch edge that we've been working on. And I've got another blue marker here, blue line. It's kind of a zigzag here. And this marks the central marker. This is the spot where your leg 2 kind of joins up with leg 1. Okay. It's not exactly in the center, but it's kind of near the center. So we're calling that the central marker. These red lines here in the tobacco barn section indicate what I refer to in the pattern as yarn markers. And I'm going to show you how to deal with yarn markers and explain why we're dealing with yarn markers. So I've worked my way through, and this swatch is not, it's just a swatch. But if you look closely here, you can see that there is this piece of green yarn that's kind of woven up through the fabric. And here's another one. And this is what I refer to as a yarn marker. And we want the yarn markers here, and we want them to stay in our knitting so that when we come back and work with the embroidery at the end for the tobacco barns, we have them as landmarks. Okay, if you just used regular stitch markers in this section and you got to the end, you would just have kind of a blank swath, and you would have to do a whole lot of counting. So that's why we're using yarn markers in this section rather than regular stitch markers. So let me show you how the yarn markers work. They're really super simple. And I have a yarn marker actually in the swatch where you would have an edge marker, and that was just for convenience. So here I'm working the seed stitch border over to where I get to the first yarn marker. So here it is, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that yarn and I'm going to flip it between the needles to the back of the work so that it's woven in and ready for the next pass. So this section, in addition to the seed stitch and the stockinette stitch and the embroidery, I also couldn't resist throwing some beads in. So let me show you how to put a bead on. We're working on the wrong side here, and that's okay. There are beads on both sides of the work here, and the important thing to remember is that you're always going to slip your stitch with your working yarn towards the wrong side of the work. Doesn't matter which side you're on, that's always the rule here for my beads. So I have a crochet hook, and I've put a couple beads on here. I'm only going to use one at a time. To place a bead, I'm going to use the tip of my crochet hook to take the stitch off of the needle, and then I'm going to slide that bead down onto the stitch and return the stitch to the needle. I find it easier to go ahead. I know I'm going to be just slipping the stitch, but I find it easier to get it onto the left-hand needle before I slip it. So I just slip it and continue on my way. I'm carrying the yarn in front. As I work my way across. Okay, let's do another one just for the fun of it. Like I said, this is just a swatch, so I'm not following a specific pattern, but let's put a bead on this next stitch. So I have a bead on my needle, bead on a hook. I use the hook to lift the stitch off the needle, and I slide the bead down onto the stitch and return the stitch to the needle. And now I'm just slipping that stitch to the right hand needle and can continue working my way across the row. And I'm about to come upon my next yarn marker, and every time I come to the yarn markers, I'm just going to flip them. So here it is. Take the yarn, move it to the back of the work between the needles, and keep on trucking. All right. So there you can see we placed 2 beads on that row. I'll show you how to place a bead on the right side of the work, which is really exactly the same, except that the yarn goes along and back. But I'll go ahead and show that to you, and then I will show you how to embroider these tobacco barns. So let's do another bead here. Sorry, my yarn is getting caught in my yarn marker. Okay, so I placed the bead on, and I've been knitting, so my yarn's in the back, which is where I want it. I want it towards the wrong side. I just slip it and keep on knitting. I know in some patterns they have you go ahead and knit the bead or purl the bead, depending. I chose not to do that in this section, mostly because of the knight's armor and the way the beads are placed in there. When you don't actually work the stitch, when you just slip it, it gives the bead a little more play to move up and down, and that centers it a little bit better. And so if you actually work it, then it forces the bead into a more specific position, and I wanted them to be a little bit loose. So that's why I made the design choice that I did. And I figured if we were doing it that way for the knight's armor, we would do it that way also for the tobacco barns, just for consistency's sake. All right, I'm going to go ahead and knit across the rest of this row. And then when I come back, I will show you how to embroider a tobacco barn. Okay, I am back. And one of the things I did here was I moved all my stitches to waste yarn. And that's actually what you should be doing after you finish knitting all of the stitches for leg 3. You're going to move everything to waste yarn, and that will set us up for leg 4, which is a big mystery at the moment. But it also is going to make it easier to do the embroidery. I have done embroidery with the cable still in the work, and it's stiff and flops around, so it's actually easier to do the embroidery when you have your stitches on waste yarn. So tobacco barns, I found when I was doing my research, I found this really cool graphic that was done. Someone did a survey or a study of Southern Maryland tobacco barns, and I just thought all these different shapes were really interesting and unique, but they're also pretty intricate, and I wanted to keep things simple for our project. So I simplified some of them and chose them for our 5 different tobacco barns. You can do whatever you want here. The 5 that I have chosen are suggestions, but if you want to do your own research, or if you want your barn to look a little different, then by all means, go ahead and do it. Just be careful about the placement of the stars and how that works with your barn. We're going to be using a skill called Backstitch, and there is this cool little graphic in your pattern about how to backstitch. So to start, you're going to bring the needle up through the fabric a little bit ahead of where you want your line to start, and then you take the needle back down through the fabric at the starting point. I know that sounds backwards, but that's kind of why it's backstitch. Okay. And then step 3 is to bring the needle up a little bit ahead of the last stitch, and then take it down through the fabric just at the end of the last stitch. And then you're going to repeat steps 3 and 4. So let me show you how that works here. I am going to do Tobacco Barn C, I think, in this spot, or at least get started on it. When I was thinking about how I wanted to embroider this, I decided that I wanted my stitches not to be too big, because I'm always concerned with like shawls and things about snagging. So I decided that I would try and keep my back stitches about 2 knitted stitches tall. So I am going to start here. So here's kind of a seed stitch bump, and so I would think of that as my starting spot. So if I want to go up 2 stitches, I'm going to come up from the bottom 2 stitches away, and I think I have probably a yard of yarn on my needle. So I came up through, and now I'm going to go down a couple stitches away. And you don't want to pull this too tight, because then it kind of like will disappear into the fabric. So I kind of keep mine pretty loose. So now step 3, here's where I went down. Here's the end of my first stitch. So I want to come up a couple stitches away, come coming up. And then I'm going to go back down. Okay, and you can see if I pull this tight, it ends up leaving a gap there, and I don't want that gap, so I'm not going to pull that tight. I want it to kind of just nestle in there. So I'm going to come up again, a couple stitches away. And one of the things I found as I practiced this more, you can insert the tip of your needle to go down, and if you're doing a straight line, see how I brought that tip up just a little bit of ways away? Brought it up ahead of where I'm headed, and that kind of simplifies things a little bit, makes it go a little faster. So I need to make a turn so that I can make the peak of the roof. So this time when I go down, I'm not going to come up straight ahead. I'm going to kind of go off at an angle. So you always kind of have to be thinking ahead to where you're going next. So I'm going to go back down and then go along and come up again on that same angle. See, so that made a nice little turn there. I think we'll go up a little bit more. Now, when I was doing these in my actual shawl, you better believe, well, you can believe whatever you want, but I was being very precise, and I was counting on my chart how many stitches up and how many stitches over, and being super math geeky and thinking about slope and rise over run and all that fun stuff. But you can also eyeball it, which is kind of what I'm doing this time. So I think I'm going to make that my peak. So if that's my peak, I don't want to go ahead of it, right? I want to start going downwards. So I'm actually going to take my needle pretty much straight across here. And this is one of the other reasons not to pull too tight, because if you pull it too tight, it can skew the how your stitches lean. So I'm going to rotate this. And now make another stitch. And I've made these stitches a little bit bigger than the stitches I did before, and that's okay. My barn may be a little lopsided, and that's okay too, because let me tell you, some of these tobacco barns are not super precise. I mean, they're precise, but they're not symmetrical. How's that? All right, so I'm adjusting because I'm going to make a turn. So instead of going straight out here, I've gone off to the side so that I can make the turn to go down. So I'm going down and up a little bit away. All right. I'm just going to finish off that stitch and kind of see where we land here. So I'm definitely lopsided because I am talking and not counting, and that's okay. I have a couple of options here. I'm a little bit out of space over here if I want my barn to be centered between the two posts. So I could come back and I could do like a vertical line here to give it kind of like the lean-to shed look. Or maybe I don't do that at all. Maybe I decide to put a little, I don't know. How about a door in our barn? Sound like a plan? As you can see, I'm not being super precise. This is totally okay. You can mix and match parts. You can do research and find your favorite tobacco barn and try and replicate that. If I am, oh, this is good. Show you the back. The back stitch is a little bit more dense on the back, and this is because of the way you loop the yarn. For me to get over to where I want to do my door, I'm not going to go all the way through. I'm just going to kind of tack it there to hold it down. Again, I'm avoiding huge loops on the back because I don't want it snagging in the end. And now if I'm going to do a door, I think I'll come up here. This is not a real precise science. This is art. And I will be really excited to see how your tobacco barns turn out. Whether you follow the pattern strictly or do your own thing, I am sure that it will be beautiful. Got that one a little tight. So I look forward to seeing your tobacco barns. If you're concerned, since I have been talking all about tobacco barns and not so much about the knight's armor, the knight's armor is pretty much all knits and purls, with the exception of the beads. So it really is a piece of cake. Compared to, not that this is hard, it's just there are a lot more steps. So look, there's a tobacco barn. So for me, I'm just going to tack down the edge of my yarn. I kind of wind it through some of these other loops that are on the back to secure it. Again, not pulling too tight. And I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to tie a little knot, I think, here. And then I'll trim it. Trim the end. So there it is, an embroidered tobacco barn. Actually looks a little more like a house, but there are houses in Southern Maryland too. Works for me. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can always pop onto our Facebook group or the Ravelry thread, and we'd be happy to help you out. Happy knitting!